Hello, this is the third video for students enrolled upon EDST335, Global Education. This week we started the topic of human rights, and we began the session by looking at rights in relation to other influences on our behaviour, such as morals and ethics. And we decided that morals really deal with meta-concepts such as right and wrong and good and bad. And often we can trace their origins back to some sort of religious practice. In other words, morals are passed on to us at the diktat of a deity or a pantheon of deities. Now I know the humanists amongst you might disagree with that, but the important thing here is that morals deal with right and wrong. Ethics, on the other hand, is the application of those moral constructs. And we looked at a couple of scenarios, some sort of ethical conundrums, whether it was better to sacrifice one person to save five. And we sort of complicated the scenario each time to throw up sort of more question and debate. And we see that it's quite a complex area, the area of ethics. Human rights, on the other hand, are very much more the product of rational thought. They come from us. And you could argue that they are forged by hundreds, if not thousands, of years of struggle against oppression. In other words, for emancipation. They are therefore very human constructs, and as such, overarch government, and you could argue even overarch gods. And I'll just qualify that by saying that we can be critical of political practice through the lens of human rights in a similar way to the way we can be critical of religious practice through the lens of human rights. So there are these overarching concepts, these overarching structures, and as such, of course, they're fairly powerless. There is no enforcement. There's no human rights police. In fact, the only power that they have is the power of embarrassment. So you might well ask yourselves, well, what's the point of them? And indeed, there is a sort of controversial issue at the moment facing the government, because within the next 12 months, the Human Rights Act comes before Parliament, and there is a schism in the present coalition government. On the one hand, we have the Liberals, or the Liberal Democrats rather, who are in favour of the Human Rights Act, and on the other side we have the Conservative Party that are against the Human Rights Act. But interestingly, it doesn't just come down to a simple kind of argument of liberalism versus conservatism. It's more complicated than that, because, as we said the other day, if you begin to enshrine human rights in law, well then human rights become the behest of judges who, after all, are appointed by politicians. And also, once they become law, they are subject to amendment and even repeal. For example, the Human Rights Act coming before Parliament doesn't include anywhere near the 30 articles of the UN Declaration. Already we have governments, politicians in other words, selecting what they regard as more important human rights than others. So we have selection, we have interpretation, we have amendment, we have repeal by politicians. So that's really the kind of argument. If we don't enshrine them in law, well, they can't be enforced. We can't be they can't be policed. We can't drive change. We can't really push for those rights to be recognised and make it illegal to ignore them. And I guess that's the question for this week. Do you what side of that argument are you on? Do you agree with the Human Rights Act? Do you think that human rights should be enshrined in law, or do you think they should remain overarching concepts, sort of conceptual ideas which merely embarrass rather than punish or reprimand? Okay, so that's this week's question. Last week's question, we had a bit of a discussion in the Bohemian Coffee Hour, and if we don't get a chance to discuss this question this week coming, which I hope we'll do, we can do it in that Bohemian Coffee Hour after the lecture. So bring your berets, bring your copies of Jean-Paul Sartre, and we'll meet and we'll have a coffee and we can have a chat about some of these kind of thorny issues that the topic of human rights will throw up. Okay, so have a great weekend, have a think, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.